also going to switch my camera, so hopefully this works. Let's see. Oh, let's see. Sorry. All right. Can you all see the presentation? All right, it doesn't look like it changed where I'm looking here. Hold on 1 second. So like Banshee said, I am the president and CEO of the Colorado Children's Campaign. And I'm very excited that you are all here and care about Kids Count in Colorado. I'm guessing that you all have heard of Kids Count before, but we do this every year, and we release Kids Count in August. And we're really excited to have you all be some of the first for us to do this presentation. We did one last week in Weld County, but we're excited to get this out all over the state. So I can move my slides. There we go. I'm Heather. I brought Riley. He's our VP of Strategy and Government Affairs. I'm going to talk about data, and then I'm going to hand it over to Riley so that he can talk about some of the policy implications and some of the things that we're thinking about for 2025. As you may or may not know, the Colorado Children's Campaign is a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy and research organization, and we focus on the well-being of kids and families. We have been serving the state since 1985, and we are always proud to champion policies and programs that advance opportunities for kids throughout our state. And because we are a research and data-driven organization, Kids Count is a really important thing for us, and why we are so glad that you all are interested in joining us today, because we love talking about data, and we think it's really important to ensure that this is something that people throughout the state know about. So we've been actually producing Kids Count for 30 years now. And we want this to always be a useful tool and an essential piece of work that is informing policy, but also this is a report that the media uses. I know when I was at my old job and I wrote grants, I used this a lot for grants. So we want this to be a really relevant piece of work that is used in a lot of different ways. And we also want it to be a way that we inform legislators about how to make Colorado the best place for kids. So for those of you who are new to Kids Count, I'm going to share a little bit of background about the project before we dive into the data and recommendations. The Kids Count report is part of Annie Casey's National Kids Count project. So they do a national Kids Count, and we do the Colorado version. The report tracks child well-being at both the state and county levels in the areas of family economic prosperity, child and family health, early childhood learning and development, and youth success in K-12 education. There are county by county fact sheets at the end of the report. Riley, could you put the link to the report in? So you'll be able to see that. We have some physical copies. If you want a physical copy, let us know, and we can get those to you. And we really see this as a tool, like, right now, information is easy to access. Everybody has access to the internet, but it's not always trustworthy when you get that. So in a time where it's easy to access but hard to trust, Kids Count really serves as an important source of quality, non-biased information on children and families for decision makers, advocates, the media, for all of you to use. Every year we know that legislators and policymakers are using Kids Count to inform their bills and their decisions when they're making the votes. Nonprofit and community leaders, and questions or comments, we definitely want to be able to address those as well. I don't know why when I'm clicking to change, it's not changing. Okay, so now to the report. The 2024 Kids Count in Colorado report shows that too many of our kids and families are struggling to navigate higher costs of living, especially with the expiration of pandemic-era federal investments in social safety net programs. I'm going to talk about some of those pandemic-era programs that have ended over and over again throughout this presentation, because we're seeing this as something that's really impacting our low-income families quite a bit. The data that we're going to talk about show concerning trends in health coverage, the stability of our teaching and caring workforces, and housing insecurity. In other areas, such as disparities in academic outcomes and the share of kids living in deep poverty, our progress has stagnated. But not everything we're going to talk about is bad news. There's some good news. We do continue to see some positive and impactful steps that support kids and families. In this last legislative session, we adopted a new more equitable school funding formula, and we passed some deeply meaningful tax cuts or tax credits for families for incomes and for care workers. So we'll dive into the data and talk about what steps policymakers and voters can take during the election and in the upcoming year to really continue some positive steps for kids or create new ones. Just a few level setting points before we really dig in. The kids count data that we use, a lot of it you're going to see today is from 2022. That's because that is the most current census data, so that data lags a little bit. But we are always working to regularly update and track data as it becomes available. So there is a Kids Count data center on our website. And if you are using the Kids Count report and you think, oh, there might be something a little bit more recent, you can always go to our website and check the data center and see if we have some more updated data for you. On another note, you are going to see throughout the presentation, there are going to be some charts that have a gap. The gap in that data is a result of the pandemic. And that's basically because during the pandemic, the data that was collected in 2020 didn't meet all of the Census Bureau's quality standards. And so we don't include it because the Census Bureau says it's not reliable data. So onto the data. As of 2022, Colorado was home to more than 1.25 million children. And whether those children live on the Eastern Plains, the Western Slope, or somewhere in between, each one of them deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential. We know that kids in Colorado come from diverse backgrounds with a variety of experiences, strengths, challenges, and needs. Among all kids in Colorado in 2022, more than 1 in 5 lived in an immigrant family, which is defined as a family in which at least one parent was born outside of the United States. And approximately 1 in 6 lived in families that spoke a language other than English at home. And a quarter of the kids in our state are under the age of 5. As of 2022, the Front Range was home to the largest share of Colorado children, with 85% of children in the state residing in a Front Range community. However, most Front Range communities or counties have also seen their child populations decline since 2020. And Douglas and Weld counties are the only 2 Front Range counties where the child population has increased between 2020 and 2022. As I said earlier, as we put this report together, one of the clearest stories that emerged is that the end of policies that supported kids and families' well-being during the pandemic is affecting access to healthcare, food, housing, and other basics, at a time when we're also seeing the cost of living in Colorado increase significantly. We saw examples of this story across all our issue areas, but especially in data on the economic security of Colorado families. Economic security is foundational to child well-being. We know that kids need a house. We know that families need to be able to feed their children and have enough money for basic items. But as prices for basic needs rise faster than incomes, and as pandemic era supports are evaporating, too many of our kids are living in families that are struggling to make ends meet. So a note on this graph, this is one of those instances that I mentioned with gaps in the data as a result of the pandemic. So you see that gap, and you'll see in a couple more charts with that. In 2022, 1 in 9 Colorado kids experienced poverty. Here we are defining poverty by the federal government definition, and that is an annual income of about $28,000 for a family of 4 in 2022. You can see that this is not significantly different from Colorado's pre-pandemic child poverty rate. So although the official poverty measure depicted here does not show a significant change in child poverty from 2021 to 2022, estimates calculated using a different and more holistic measure, the supplemental poverty measure, which accounts for impacts of programs like Medicaid and tax credits, show that the poverty rate for US children more than doubled between 2021 and 2022. So that sharp rise in the poverty rate is largely due to the expiration of the expanded child tax credit at the end of 2021. So that was a pandemic era tool that we used to lift half of the children in poverty out of poverty, but Congress failed to renew it in 2021. And so many of those families fell back below the poverty line. So that's just our first example of how the expiration of policies designed to support kids' well-being during the pandemic has rolled back progress for families and children. In addition, when you look at our indicators for economic security and well-being, we can really tell that the current measurements are not truly reflective of what Colorado families need, and we know that more Colorado families across several income brackets can be struggling. So again, the most recent federal poverty level for a family of four was just below $28,000. So that means with their definition, if you're making $29,000, you're not living in poverty. I think we know that that's not the case. So we like to also look at a more holistic measure called the self-sufficiency standard. And it shows that a family of four in the metro area of Arapahoe County needs to make just under $110,000, or 4 times what the federal government states as a poverty level. So when we talk about child poverty in Colorado, it's vital that we look past that statewide poverty rate. Looking only at the statewide rate really masks the difference in economic opportunity available to families across the state. Although Colorado's child poverty rate sits well below the national average, some communities in our state have child poverty rates more than double the national average. In 2022, our poverty rates in Colorado counties ranged from 2% in Douglas County to 35% in Castilla County in the San Luis Valley. Poverty affects children in all types of communities, rural, urban, and somewhere in between, but all 5 counties with the state's highest poverty rates are rural communities, indicating that we need to look at policies to support the economic well-being of families in our rural counties in particular. Back in 2012, nearly 1 in 3 Montezuma County children experienced poverty. The county's child poverty rate dropped steadily over the next decade, reaching 23% in 2022. However, the share of children experiencing poverty remains twice as high as the statewide average. This is one of those places where if we were in person, I'd be like, tell me more about this. So if you have thoughts about why we're seeing this poverty rate that's so much higher in Montezuma, please pop things into the comments. We are always interested to hear what you experience in real life in these real places.
Yeah, and Heather, one thing I'll just also add is I know we have some folks on from Dolores County as well. As you know, you live there. Population's a little smaller, so the sample size or the N size for some of the data is just too small to be reported. So we don't have as many breakdowns for Dolores County in here. But I will say the child poverty rate in Dolores is 16.3%. So it's often tracking closer to the national average of our poverty measure, and still just slightly above where we are statewide in Colorado. I'll try to chime in here with some Dolores County facts as we go through. Like I said, we just don't have a big enough sample size to always pull the data for them.
Awesome. Thanks, Riley. So, so we have the poverty rate, but we also know we have children who are experiencing extreme poverty. And those are children who live in a family whose income is less than half the federal poverty level, or below about $14,000. Those kids are facing some of the steepest barriers to well-being, and those families are really, really struggling. So we know that Colorado has made little progress toward reducing extreme poverty in the past decade. As of 2022, 6% of Colorado kids, or approximately 66,000 children, experience this level of severe deprivation. And it's not serving families as it should. The amount of cash assistance TANF provides to families in Colorado is also very modest. And while it can be helpful, of course, to some families, for most, it's not enough to end the cycles of poverty families find themselves in. As of July 2024, the average monthly TANF cash assistance payment for a family with one parent and two children was $592. Payments at this level still leave families well below the poverty line, and they leave families far short of what it takes to meet basic needs for housing, food, and other common household expenses. Based on housing affordability standards, a family of 3 receiving the monthly TANF basic cash assistance payment in Colorado would only be able to afford a monthly rent payment of $178. Meanwhile, the monthly fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Colorado is more than $1,000 a month. So economic security is not the only area where we see the end of policies implemented during the pandemic has the potential to eliminate progress for families. The gains made in connecting kids to health coverage are also really at risk of reversal. So the graph you see here shows positive trends in the uninsured rate for kids in Colorado and the US, again with that gap in 2020 due to the pandemic. And one important thing to take away from this graph is that over the longer term, Colorado has made historic progress at reducing our uninsured rate for children. It fell from 14% in 2008, which was significantly above the national average, to a record low of 4% in 2016. Another important takeaway from this one is that despite widespread job losses and economic turmoil between 2019 and 2021, Colorado did not see an increase in the uninsured rate for kids. This trend was largely driven by something called the continuous eligibility provision implemented at the start of the pandemic. This provision helped people on Medicaid, including kids, keep their Medicaid coverage for the duration of the public health crisis. So in Colorado, tens of thousands of kids were protected from losing their health coverage. The impact of the continuous eligibility provision on these families was significant. The uninsured rate for Colorado kids in poverty fell from 8% in 2019 to 5% in 2022. Like much of the state, Montezuma County made historic progress toward reducing the uninsured rate among children between 2012 and 2016. This time period coincides with the implementation of many provisions of the Affordable Care Act, including Medicaid expansion for adults and tax credits designed to help make health coverage more affordable. However, progress has largely stalled in recent years, both at the statewide level and here in Montezuma County. And the uninsured rate for children in the community was at 7% as of 2022. So, despite its effectiveness, kind of like the child tax credit was winning, the continuous eligibility provision ended in the spring of 2023, at which point states began redetermining who remained eligible for Medicaid coverage and disenrolling those who were no longer eligible or whose eligibility could not be determined. Tens of thousands of Colorado kids have either lost or are at risk of losing their health insurance coverage through this process known as the Medicaid unwind. Between June 2023, when Colorado began redetermining Medicaid coverage, and February of 2024, nearly 147,000 Colorado children kids throughout the entire state. And that means that there are kids who don't have insurance coverage right now, and that greatly limits their access to healthcare, obviously. Having limited access to health insurance and care means that those kids will be more likely to miss well child visits, dentist checkups, and life-saving vaccines. Colorado has taken some important steps to prevent children who still qualified for Medicaid from wrongly losing their coverage. But the state must do more to ensure that Colorado kids have the health insurance and care they need. Because without meaningful steps taken to address the Medicaid unwind, we fear that all the gains that we made in child health insurance coverage could just be erased. In addition to the unwind and the loss of coverage for children and families, we've also heard a lot from partners and providers about uncompensated care throughout the state. We know it is increasing that there are providers in particular in our safety net clinics, who are struggling to meet the demand. And I don't know if you guys, if that rings true to you all, if you're seeing that, if you're seeing your clinics closing, your clinics being overwhelmed, but we would love to hear about that as well. Okay, moving on to affordable housing. Another area that has long been a challenge for Colorado families is the demand for affordable housing. Rising interest rates and increasing rents and home prices in recent years have intensified this struggle for many Colorado families with children. With affordable housing hard to come by, tens of thousands of Colorado kids lack a stable place to call home. The most recent count estimates that nearly 20,000 Colorado kids experienced homelessness during the 2022-23 school year. Data indicate that evictions, foreclosures, and inability to afford housing are responsible for the increasing share of cases where children are experiencing homelessness. In the 2020-2021 school year, these factors were responsible for 26% of housing crises. By the 2023-24 school year, that number rose significantly, with evictions, foreclosures, and affordability being responsible for 39% of housing crises. Among those 20,000 kids experiencing homelessness, nearly 2% of Colorado infants and toddlers, more than 4,500 babies from ages birth to 3, experienced homelessness in 2021 and 2022. That's sad news. And for older kids, the vast majority of Colorado students experiencing homelessness in the 2022-23 school year were doubled up with another family due to economic hardship. So although being doubled up with another family may be less severe than being unsheltered, research still indicates that living in crowded housing is harmful to children's academic achievement, health, and behavior. Among families who are housed, housing costs often comprise so much of their household budget that they're forced to cut back on other basic needs like food, healthcare, or utilities in order to keep a roof over their heads. A family spending more than 30% of their income on housing is considered to have a high housing cost burden. In 2022, nearly 1 in 3 Colorado kids and more than 2 in 3 kids in low-income families lived in a household with a high housing cost burden. In 2022, the median value of owner-occupied housing units in Colorado was $531,100, up 31% in inflation-adjusted dollars from 2017. Meanwhile, median family income among Colorado households with children rose by only 15% during that same time period.
Heather, on this one, just a couple local stats. And looking for Dolores County, once again, smaller population, but as of this last school year, 22-23, that we have data available for, there were no homeless youth living in the county, which is great. Years prior, there seemed to be about 4 or 5 youth that identified as homeless. And so that's great that there's been solutions brought in. And then also in Montezuma, it looks like over the last several years, things have been trending the right way when it comes to homelessness in the area. In 2020, it looks like the number of homeless students peaked around 100, but that's been steadily going down every year since. And the latest data had about 45 students who identified as homeless living in Montezuma County. So I think any solutions you guys are using out in that area do seem to be working, especially here in the short term.
Awesome. Thanks, Riley. So here's our bright spot in the data. We are seeing a sharp decline in the share of Colorado kids living in food insecure households or households that experience uncertainty about whether they'll be able to afford enough food. So this decline happened at a time when the federal government temporarily expanded food assistance programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, to address hunger during the pandemic and economic downturn. However, similar to Medicaid continuous eligibility and the federal tax credit, these pandemic era expansions expired in the spring of 2023. threatening to create a hunger cliff for families whose benefits dropped sharply at the same time that food prices were rising at historic rates. So while this is a bright spot this year, we're a little concerned about what this data is going to look like in next year's Kids Count report. All right, so we've covered how many of these beneficial policies from the pandemic that helped kids and families have expired or are expiring, and that it's beginning to take a toll on Colorado kids and families. Another area that we of course know was greatly impacted by COVID was our public schools and the students they serve. Ever since many schools shut down and pivoted to remote learning at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, education advocates have wondered about the impact on student learning. And we really need to be honest about student academic achievement in our state, because even before the pandemic, a large majority of Colorado students were not on track to be proficient in reading, math, or science. After the dips during the pandemic, Colorado has started to see small increases in the share of students reading or doing math on grade level, but too many students are still left behind, and getting back to pre-pandemic levels of academic achievement should not be where we stop as education advocates. We really need to be doing better for our kids. In 2023, 44% of Colorado students in grades 3 through 8 met or exceeded expectations in English language arts on the CMAS test, the Colorado statewide academic assessment. That's up from 43% the prior year. So we're up 1%. That still means that more than half of our kids are not reading at grade level. Math saw a bigger improvement. It's up to 33% from 23% the year prior. But again, only 33% of our kids meeting standards in math is not good enough. So you can see the state is making progress, but getting back to those 2019 levels of only 46% of students meeting or exceeding expectations in English and only 35% of students being proficient in math should not be the levels that we're shooting for. That still means that more than half of kids can't read at the level they should, and nearly 2/3 aren't reaching expectations in math. It is good that we're starting to see improvement, so we don't want to be all Debbie Downer, but let's not make 2019 the standard that we're aiming for. Let's try to do a lot better for our kids. We really have to do better, especially for our students of color. Colorado also has significant educational inequities with many students of color who typically face the most obstacles to educational opportunity, and are less likely to meet grade level expectations than their white peers. The new state funding formula that we passed at the legislature earlier this year is a strong starting point for ensuring that every child has the resources and support they need to be successful in school. That new formula will turn on next school year and will target funding to students living in poverty, English language learners, and students with special needs. And we're really looking forward to implementing that new formula and building upon its success in the years to come. Of course, we all know that high school graduation is an important milestone on the path to higher education or employment. Colorado's on-time high school graduation rate, defined as the percentage of students graduating within 4 years, increased slightly in the 2022-23 school year to 83%, up from 82% in the previous school year. Graduation rates increased for most student groups, but similar to academic achievement, significant gaps based on race, ethnicity, and family income still persist. So high school graduation is an important milestone and one that has implications for a young person's future employment and educational prospects. Montezuma, Cortez, and Mancos improved their on-time graduation rates between 2014 and 2023, while Dolores 4A graduation rate was slightly below its 2014 level as of 2023. So one thing for certain, educators from early childhood to high school are critical to the success of Colorado children. They are the nurturing, familiar faces who greet kids at the door each day and who equip them with the knowledge and skills they'll need throughout their lives. Unfortunately, we know that low wages and a lack of investment in teachers, childcare educators, school mental health professionals, and others who work with kids and families take a toll on the workforce and on kids. Research shows that that student-teacher relationships contribute to a positive school environment and can have long-lasting implications for both students' academic and social development. However, more Colorado teachers are leaving their jobs in recent years. Between the fall of 2022 and fall of 2023, 17% of teachers left their positions, up from 14% 3 years earlier. We know, although many factors contribute to a teacher's decision to leave their job, salary certainly plays a role. Colorado ranks 46th in the nation for starting teacher salary and 29th in the nation for average teacher salary. If we want better educational outcomes for our kids, we have to find a way to fairly compensate the people who dedicate their careers to helping them learn. In addition to teachers, Colorado has also struggled to fill positions for other professionals who help students on their educational journeys, such as school counselors, another place where we can see the impacts of the pandemic. As a result, too many Colorado students are attending schools where the student to counselor ratio is above the recommended level, or where there is no school counselor at all. The American School Counselor Association recommends a school district have a student to counselor ratio of 250 to 1. That still seems really high, but in Colorado, nearly half of our 178 school districts did not meet that ratio. We also know that the education workforce shortage extends to childcare settings, where wages are even lower and benefits like health insurance are pretty uncommon. In 2022, the median annual wages for a childcare educator in Colorado were just under $35,000. Only 54% of the median earnings for a full-time year-round worker in Colorado, and much less than a kindergarten teacher earns. At the county level, wages range from less than $29,000 in Archuleta County to $41,000 in Eagle County. Among the 29 counties for which data were available, 13 counties had median wages for childcare educators that were below the self-sufficiency standard for a single adult, meaning they're not high enough for a childcare educator to be able to meet their most basic needs for housing, food, or transportation. A 2024 survey conducted by the National Association for the Education of Young Children found that 37% of child care center directors and family child care home operators reported that their program was experiencing a staffing shortage. Young children rely on stable, consistent, nurturing relationships in order to learn and grow. These relationships are difficult to form if childcare programs cannot hire and retain staff due to low wages. If we want to ensure that every Colorado child gets off to a strong start in life, we must pay our childcare providers what they're worth. Oh, sorry, I went too fast. Back to our K-12. Another factor that's critical to student and youth success is a positive school climate, one where students feel valued and connected to their peers and educators. The state is working to track better data to improve school climate, but we do know that chronic absenteeism and harsh discipline policies point to challenges in too many Colorado schools. Being chronically absent from school, defined as missing 10% or more of the school year, impedes students' ability to learn. In Colorado, nearly a third of students were chronically absent, and in some districts, the chronic absenteeism rate was as high as 67%. Chronic absenteeism rates in Montezuma County school districts range from 27% in Mancos to 50% in Montezuma-Cortez. Colorado must do more to promote welcoming school environments and remove barriers to attendance for all students. Similarly concerning, in the 2022-23 school year, 8% of students received an out-of-school suspension, meaning they were missing valuable learning time. And students of color were disproportionately likely to experience harsh disciplinary measures. Of students who received an out-of-school suspension, 63% were students of color, yet students of color make up only about half of the overall student population. Similarly, as we've asked earlier, this is another, that's not for you guys, it was from our previous presentation. But we are wondering about absenteeism and what that looks like in schools in your community. So the last theme that I want to touch on today is the lack of access and affordability of childcare, and especially care for our youngest infants and toddlers. Families throughout Colorado are struggling with this, and several areas are experiencing childcare deserts, with some counties having no slots, 0 slots for infants and toddlers. So early childhood is an area where the state has made some significant progress in the last few years. We want to see that momentum continue. Initiated by a successful 2020 ballot measure that you all probably know about, that increased nicotine taxes to fund preschool, the Colorado Universal Preschool Program provides 15 hours a week of free preschool to all young children in the year before kindergarten. Colorado 4-year-olds with certain risk factors can receive 30 hours of free preschool, and 3-year-olds with certain risk factors can receive 10 hours of free preschool. In its first year of the program, nearly 45,000 kids enrolled. That's about 60% of eligible children. And of those 45,000 kids, nearly 70% received half-day programming or 15 hours of preschool a week covered by the state. Even to make progress on preschool, we must also recognize that Colorado still faces a severe shortage of childcare. In 2022, approximately 240,000 Colorado kids under 6 lived in families where all available parents were working. However, Colorado licensed childcare centers, family childcare homes, and preschools only had capacity to serve about 156,000 children, about 2/3 of children who likely needed care. We also know that childcare shortages are especially acute for families with infants and toddlers who may face years-long wait lists for care if they can even afford it. All right, this is one we really have a question for you all. So childcare capacity is far too limited to meet demand in many communities across the state, and parents of young
available, because I think that's some of the things that I'm seeing is like people might be available on, there might be a spot on Monday afternoon, or things like that. Like that would, I think, be some of my questions of what that means by what capacity even is. Like what is defining capacity? Does that make any sense as a question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, Riley, do you know how it's defined?
It is typically defined as a Monday through Friday, like 9 to 5 type, or the school day is often the time that folks are looking at for when care would be needed in these types of calculations. But I think that drills down to, like, we're often using some, us and others are using blanket definitions when it could say, yeah, there is, everyone's covered, but we actually do have a problem on a Monday in a community or a Friday, right? Or the days in communities where there isn't a 4th day of school or a 5th day of school, right? And I don't think that with these broad catch definitions, I don't think that those nuances get captured as much. So Sadie, thank you for bringing that up. And that's something that we can dive into more.
And that's a real thing with Montezuma County is I don't think any of the schools go on Friday.
They don't.
Interesting.
And this is Katie in MECC. We did a deep dive in MECC on this and called in all the center-based providers, and they all have open slots, which was also very fascinating to us because you always do hear that people need it. I don't have a sense of why. I know that infant care is still crisis level here, certainly anecdotally, but I'd be curious if Angie or anybody else has more concrete knowledge as to why we might have these open slots. Maybe we just have more providers in MECC. And
Yeah, that certainly could be a situation where. Oh, go ahead.
Well, this is Raquel with Dolores County. We only have one provider here in Dolores County. And I know that there's a very long wait list and they're only Monday through Thursday. So I know that is something that we really struggle with here in Dolores County, as parents can't find daycare. So I know a lot of parents are driving either to Cortez for their kids to go to daycare and then back to Dove Creek to work, or wherever, or they're going across state lines and going to Monticello for their
Yeah.
kids to go to daycare because we have a very bad shortage on daycare.
I know one provider is not enough. I know that there's a lot of family, friend, and neighbor care in Dolores County. There has to be, right? And we have that too. And the openings for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, the pandemic switched all that, because I think that we have a really large number of kiddos that are just not going accessing care and are probably doing family, friend, and neighbor care, but it's really hard to find those folks. And I know some centers do have a waiting list, but infants and toddlers are our greatest needs. It's really hard when someone calls me and says, I have a 6-month-old and we just don't have the slots. I think that's all
Yeah, this makes me wonder if it's that there are slots, but they're not in the
Oh.
right spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen this somewhere. You know, I think this is also interesting. Sorry, Vanjie, to cut you off. Apologize.
You're
You know, I
good.
was just looking at some of the preschool data for these counties, and these numbers just aren't driving up for me. And we'll talk about the need for better data here. But as you see here on this slide, it says there's, you know, of kids under the age of 6 in Montezuma, there's 30 kids who presumably don't have a licensed slot. Meanwhile, the preschool enrollment in Montezuma County is only at 60%. Right. And so we know that these kids are going to certain settings, right? But these numbers aren't, Heather, quite frankly, just driving the way we would expect them to. And then in Dolores County, right, there says there's about 29 3 and 4-year-olds who need preschool services. And according to the most recent data, all those kids seem to be enrolled. Once again, those are our older kids where we don't necessarily have the cost models or the business models to extend down to our younger kids. But I just wanted to flag that some of this data, and we'll talk about some advocacy needs here at the end, it doesn't quite line up the way that we would expect it to.
So I can explain that for Dolores County. We have a preschool program that most of the age that you just said for preschool age, they go there. So they get to go to the preschool program, but that's only half a day. They still have half a day that their parents need to find daycare. And I only know this because my children go to both the preschool and the daycare. But I do know that it is very hard to get into the preschool or the preschool kids into the daycare for that extra afternoon or that extra morning, because they have a morning class and an afternoon class. So they are missing out for half a day.
In any type of preschool. And so that could mean any setting that has a preschool curriculum that offered at least 10 hours, right? But doesn't actually fully reflect that a kid needs a full day care, right? Parents need a full day care. And so when we say, yes, 100% of your students were enrolled in
created a program where parents can drop off at 9 a.m. pick up at 2 p.m. And so what I noticed as I was building this program, as the length of the program grew, the response from community caregivers really changed. And I saw the response deeply leaning into reflecting a need for childcare, because once you get into that sort of 4-hour range, that's an amount of time where an employed caregiver can actually achieve something, and beyond the libraries are playing an important role there.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And I think we also know, like, in rural areas, it also looks different, and people are finding more unique and creative ways to fill that gap. So, all right, I realize we're almost out of time here, so get moving. So this is just about the cost of childcare, and that remains a significant barrier. I think you all know this as well. In 2022, the average cost of childcare for an infant in a childcare center was $19,573 per year, which is nearly 16% of the median income of a married couple in our state, and nearly half the median income for a single parent. So while we've made progress for kids going into preschool and kindergarten, we still have a lot of work to do, just as you all are saying, to ensure that those gains last and that we're not forgetting about our youngest babies and toddlers who are the most expensive to care for. All right, I'm going to hand this over. I've given you all the data that's all depressing, and Riley gets the fun part of talking about like what we should do about all of this. So Riley.
Thank you. I was just reading Katie's note in the chat. This is the type of stuff that we like love to hear about, right? These types of models are working. How can we export them, grow them, right? Bring them to other parts of our state. And I think this is a great thing, Katie. I was just making a note back to you that I'm jotting this down now that we can hopefully have a good story to tell here, right? I think that's fantastic that MECC is doing that over their summer. So yeah, so you know, Riley Kids, I work at the Capitol. I go down and I work with our staff who take a look at this data every year. Look at the trends, work with folks like you all, hear ideas like the MECC Summer Hub, and then try to figure out policy solutions that we can push on with our state legislators and our state agencies. And so right now, this is what we're doing. We're presenting this data, hearing from you all, and working with lawmakers and other stakeholders to craft bills and budget items for the next session that starts in January 2025. And so we kind of have some four major broad buckets of things that we're thinking about that touch across all issue areas that we work on. And first, we need to continue to address the effects of the pandemic, and especially those expiring or expired policies. So we've already passed a bill in the state, which should go into effect in a couple of years, around expanded multi-year coverage for Medicaid. So essentially, if you're between the ages of 0 to 3, and there's a few older adult populations, but if you're enrolled in Medicaid or CHIP anytime between the ages of when you're born and 3 years old, you get to maintain your health insurance coverage. That'll kick on in 2026. There's going to be efforts to expand that even further. So if you're a child enrolled in Medicaid, maybe you don't need to be redetermined for 6 years or 12 years, that you just stay on that coverage. We know that helps both with family economic security, family burden, right? Having to go and fill out that redetermination paperwork. We also need to recognize that policies like the federal child tax credit have expired, and that means that others need to step up, right? The feds have not been able to pass a balanced budget or continue the government for very long. The child tax credit was part of the deal several years ago. It is one of the most evidence-based interventions we could possibly have in our country. It cut child poverty in half, but that's gone away. And so Colorado has now stepped up. Last year, they passed numerous tax credits, including the family affordability tax credit, which would kick in next year, which would give families of varying size and different incomes a tax credit to help make sure that they're able to make ends meet. We need to make sure that programs like that continue, especially if the feds aren't going to step up. And then while we did see some positive trends when it came to food security, right? We've done a lot of great things as our state and nation. We do know that that policy also expired. And as Heather said, we need to be thinking about what the data might be looking like next year. And we're kind of nervous about that. But the state has stepped up here. Voters passed Healthy School Meals for All, which was a universal free breakfast and lunch program, which has been working in our schools. But unfortunately, the budget situation in our state is threatening that program. And lawmakers need to find a way to make sure it's solvent and actually delivering food and services to our schools and students. So we're going to be working hard with legislators next year to make sure that universal school meals continues. As Heather said, we have a new school funding formula that we were proud to work on and pass last year. That new funding formula, if it's implemented correctly, will put an additional $500 million into our schools. That funding formula will be refocused to think about kids who are living in poverty, who are learning English as a second language, or who have special needs. And it has a special emphasis on rural communities. We recognize that rural communities have their own challenges and complexities when it comes to delivering care. We always talk about it's much easier for the HVAC repairman to make it down the street in Denver, whereas they might need to travel hours and hours and hours to get to school districts in your area of the state. We need to have a system that recognizes those unique challenges. And if lawmakers follow through on their promise, that new funding formula will be implemented for the next school year. But we can't just stop with students either. We need to better support our schools, teachers, and counselors. There's been recent legislation passed around care workers, where if you're an eligible family, friend, and neighbor provider or healthcare worker, you can start to get tax credits. We've passed other tax credits like this over the last few years, but those are often Band-Aid measures, right? We recognize that a $1,200 investment is really helpful for an early childhood educator, but they need to be making a lot more money, a lot more compensation, have full benefits packages, and a place where they can call home that's not too far from their place that they work. And so we're going to continue to work on policies to make sure that we're supporting our educators, our care workers, our counselors, and our childcare staff, because we know that they're the ones who are providing that loving care each and every day. But then with all this, and you'll see this throughout Heather's presentation, you'll see it throughout our book, we don't have great data in this state all the time for how our programs are doing, especially after we've passed these really massive programs like universal pre-K. If we were to go back a few slides, you will see that we only have data on a little under half of the state when it comes to universal pre-K. We believe it's working. We hear anecdotes from parents, providers, and others that yes, we're saving money. We have more kids in our slots, more kids in our systems, but we don't have a data system that can help tell that story. And that's the case in our Medicaid system. That's the case in our TANF program. That's the case in our public education system. If we want to continue investments and we want to continue making policy change, for us, that needs to be rooted in data and research. And right now, I don't have the data and research that I need to make the case. And so we're going to go find that data so that next time we make an investment, it's well informed, it's backing up what's actually happening on the ground, it's reflective of the true practice, and then we can actually draw some investments. So that's what we're going to be going and focusing on for the next session. But of course, there's also an election right around the corner, right? What are we, less than 30 days from the November 5th election. This year, there's a whole host of stuff on the candidate, right? The whole House of Representatives is up, about half the state Senate. We have numerous congressional seats. We have a president, right, that will be elected. And then there's numerous ballot measures that are also out. And so the Children's Campaign every year, every election cycle want to put out information for the issues we work on, how you can find your state and local representatives, how you can register to vote, and what's on the ballot this upcoming November. So please check out cokidsvote.org for all that information. It also has a lot of information that was shared in Kids Count today too. And what we ask you to do is take this info to your elected officials or your candidates and say, where are you on childcare? How are you going to help infant and toddler slots get bolstered in my community? And they might not have the answer, but they should at least know the issue, in our opinion. So Heather, I'm going to hand it back over to you to kind of close us out for today.
All right. We also want to I mentioned this earlier, but we do have the Kids Count Data Center on our website. So if you're looking for more data, please check out the data center to learn more. And if you need help or you're still looking for something you can't find, please let us know. We're happy to help. And here is our Kids Flash newsletter. So we put out information in varying ways and it changes during the session, but we always are putting out the Kids Count newsletter. So if you don't get it, please scan here right now and sign up, or you can go to our website and sign up. This QR code probably just takes you to our website. But we love to get that information out. And then here's just our information. If you want to get in touch or you have questions, we really appreciate your time and all of the work that you do in the state, and we love being here and being able to share this information, and would love to do it again next year. Vanjie, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heather and Riley, for coming and sharing this. And the actual recording might be a little funky because I got kicked off however many times you heard it say recording in progress, like 4 times. So that might be a little sketchy, but you will share these slides with me so I can share them out, correct? Awesome.
Yes. Yep, we can do that.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming and listening. And thank you again, Riley and Heather. It was really great to hear your voices and see your faces. And I'll see everyone later. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.